Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and this video is called Relax, the Devotional Practice of Astrological Magic. So, really, relaxation is one of the key uh, practices for devotional practice. And not only can you relax and do astrological magic with the devotional practice, but I think the devotional practice also helps you relax about the whole area. And, this was brought about. I have a lot of people emailing me and they're really worried about the details of, for example, of ritual. And so, should I put the candles on the right side or the left side? That sort of thing. And they're very worried about it. What they're looking for are the rules. Please tell me the rules. I need to know the rules. Because the view there, the automatic assumption is that there's a right way to do things, only one right way. And if you do the wrong way, things are really going to be disastrous. It's going to blow up in your face. And so there are these mysterious rules. And again, why you do this stuff is not really clear. But you have to follow these rules or there's dire consequences. And, in a lot of ways, this esoteric stuff is kind of a more extreme version of people's daily life. And again, there's a lot of inexplicable stuff that they have to do. And if they don't do it, they're going to get in trouble. Um, so, really, and this comes into play with my practice as an attorney, as well as astrological, is that what I find is that if you understand the essence, then that allows you to go deeper than rules. The rules never cover reality. You make up this. You have to do X, you have to do Y, and then you have a situation come up in real life that just doesn't fit with X and Y. By understanding the essence, then you can have your actions more closely conform to reality. Cooking, I think, is a good example of it. If you're not a master chef, you're going to need to follow the recipe. If you understand the essence of the interaction of the ingredients, then there's no need for recipes. You can go ahead and, you open up the refrigerator, see what's ever there, and make this amazing dish, just right from scratch without having a recipe at all. And if we think about contemporary esotericism, magic, astrology, chakra cleansing, whatever, New Age or whatever, Golden Dawn, all the different sizes of stuff you can get into. What I find is that while there's a lot of optimistic marketing, a lot of happy talk, a lot of positiveness, there's a shadow of pervasive fear. And this is what I find in a lot of people that I deal with, clients, students, people, asking me questions or whatever, is they're really, really scared. They're really, really nervous. And esotericism itself seems to breed that. I think, partly it's because of, we've had 2,000 years of conditioning, by the church that you shouldn't do anything other than, they're the only ones you can do for spiritual stuff. Everything else is dangerous. We also have atheistic materialism, which is saying nothing exists except matter and energy. And so you're stepping outside of that, which is scary. People don't have experience with it. Lots and lots of fear. In fact, what I would say about of astrology in general, what's called astrology, modern astrology, is its main function is reassurance. People do not want to know the future if the future is bad. Okay? The purpose of astrology is to make you feel better and to make you feel like you're going to get what you want, or at least things are going to be okay. And that's alternatively, when people get more into learning astrology or whatever, modern astrology in particular, then it give you a false sense of security, a false sense of control. I know what's going on. So again, Mercury retrograde, something went bad. Okay, we didn't know what was going to happen before Mercury retrograde. We couldn't predict what was going to happen under Mercury retrograde. Bad stuff happens when it's not Mercury retrograde, but nevertheless, we can feel good, like, oh, my car broke down, it must be Mercury retrograde. Okay. And again, there's this whole, like I said, this fear, this way of dealing with fear. And, I have this sense that, people, despite the fact that they're getting into it for that purpose, that they're not, there's this underlying sort of shadow, fear that's going on with it. And so rules are really a way of dealing with fear. And it gives us a structure and it gives us a sense that if we follow the rules, everything's going to be okay. And if we just do what we're told, then we won't get in trouble. Now, again, in real life, that's not true. There's plenty of situations where people, you think of someone who worked at the same job for 50 years and they got fired, worked hard, and they still got fired. It doesn't necessarily work that way in real life either. Other thing about fear is I say, if you're working with demons, if you're dealing with evil, malefic forces doing evil magic, then yeah, fear is actually reasonable. it's dangerous. It's like dealing with like, chemicals or something, pesticides or whatever, dangerous chemicals. You do need to have some fear because this stuff's dangerous. Um, and then there's also the sense with, with rules that, ego, my way is the right way. Well, obviously, you know, if it wasn't the right thing to do, I wouldn't be doing it. So, I think that it also goes into this whole, the safety is a sense of the sort of, you just do what you're told without understanding what's going on, because atheistic materialism really, at least to nihilism, the modern approach is there is no inherent meaning to anything. It's all made up. There's no purpose, maybe satisfying your desires. So, I mean, these are all sort of things that are all sort of mixed in as to why people are looking for rules. Um, this sort of mainstream contemporary esoteric practice is not wrong. I mean, definitely follow if it resonates with you. What I find is nobody will acknowledge that they're following, that they're, for example, a modern astrologer. Nobody. It's like accusing you of being a pedophile or something. It's like everyone's doing it. Everyone's having this particular process. There's nothing wrong with it, but no one wants to acknowledge that that's what they practice anymore. Um, again, if that's what you're into, that's, go for it. But there are alternatives. I mean, there's sort of like if you go out there, you look on social media or go into a bookstore or whatever, it's the same thing over and over again, modern, 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 modern. And like I said, the same approach is given to people. But there are different possible approaches. And so the devotional practice, which I've sort of spontaneously developed but recognizes in line with a lot of traditional spiritual practice, is something that it's a definitely alternative. Again, it's not the right way to go. It's not the only way to go. It's not the way to go, to be safe or whatever. It's like if it resonates with you, great. If something else resonates with you, go with that. But I just want to point out there that there's an alternative, and it's definitely something that again, in terms of dealing with fear, rather than seizing on, oh, I have to follow all the rules, I have to do it perfectly, this is an alternative approach. Like I said, helps you relax with your spiritual practice, and have a very positive spiritual practice and astrological practice if it resonates with you. So really, what I would say about the essence of devotional practice is that it's inspirational contact with angels. It's not ritual in the sense of being empty. This is the typical sort of scientific academic approach. This is empty ritual, right? This is you do what you do for a purpose, for a reason, and basically, like I said, for inspiration and for this connection with the celestial angels. So I guess even in a devotional approach, I follow an alternative and really not having rules, but trying to see the essence, to allow for individual resonance within the general devotional approach, which again, it's very popular for people like, oh, do your own thing, except then you have to do it like everybody else. It ends up being very conformist. And so it's interesting. I was reading a book I was trying to find the book. I was frustrated because I couldn't find the book again, but it's a book about Bali. And they have all sorts of very developed system of sort of locational, it's almost like a feng shui. And it's interesting because even though they have this very complex system built up, spiritual system, that what they do in a lot of cases is you can get a shortcut by making sure that the space or the house or whatever you're working with is beautiful and harmonious. And so that's what I would say is an excellent sort of touchstone for a devotional practice, is that you look at your ritual space, at your ritual implements, the ritual itself. You make sure that that is beautiful, that it's uplifting, that it has individually resonant for you from the alternatives you can select within the tradition. And it really is kind of amazing. People send me pictures of their altars, really beautiful. The ritual that they've done, it's, as I said, very inspiring and very beautiful. So, what is it that we're doing in a devotional practice? What is this all about? So a devotional practice is contacting, at least in the context of an astrological magic, is contacting real angels and celestial spirits. Okay, first of all, this is not, some modern thing. It's not simply, you're deluding yourself, or these are creations of your own mind or egregores or something like that. These are real beings that exist externally to your ego self. Okay, which is not to say that you don't have them inside of you already. The planets are inside you and outside you. but they're not totally dependent on your ego self. It's not something that's been conventionally created by human beings, and it's not something that you're in control of. So the next thing is that they're benign. And so, these are positive beings. These are angelic. They're not out to get you. They're not going to hurt you. They're not angry at you. They're not going to get angry at you. And you can immediately stop worrying about blowback. I mean, that's I think one of the greatest advantages of a devotional practice is that you just don't have to worry about, that you're dealing with these beings that if you make one mistake, there's going to be some horrible negative consequences. There's some kind of karmic problems or something like that. They're also not intentionally going to cost you problems. They're not looking like they're not, waiting for you to make mistakes so that they can zap you. The worst effect, there's really typically no effect. And so, I do have people report occasionally, once in a blue moon, someone will come back and say there's a problem. First of all, was that problem actually something that was caused by the talisman or the practice? Very hard to figure that out. 20 years ago, I remember a good example of it. Someone's like, they bought a Jupiter talisman, and 3 weeks later, their mom fell down the stairs, so they threw out the talisman. I mean, obviously, it had to be the talisman, right? I mean, that's just sort of basically superstitious thinking, I think, is problematic. I mean, I think that you really need to have repeated, similar response to the similar circumstance and have it happen over and over and over again in order to start drawing some conclusions about it. So, for example, algol. I mean, I had this happen, and many people have reported to me, once they first get an algol talisman, then they have electronic problems. I mean, the power goes out, the internet goes down, things like that. I had a thermostat actually zap, get blown up, and I had the weirdest internet interference. The tech support really couldn't explain what was going on, and then it goes away. But I mean, this is probably 100 times I've had this reported by people. So I think that's, at that point I'm starting to say, well, that's, an effect that's caused by algol. But say, oh, I got this particular talisman, I got a sun talisman, and, like I said, 6 weeks later, my whatever, I fell down the stairs. Again, I just don't think that's not enough to say that caused it. And so it's very difficult to think. The other thing I would say about it is, again, I think if you have you could potentially have a negative effect. Maybe you have more like an allergic reaction. And this is why it's useful to check your chart. It's also useful to do divination. Because again, you could have a negative reaction to it and not really be through any fault of the talisman, or the angel. It's not like they're coming after you or trying to get you. So again, if we want to go into this deeper, what are we doing when we're having contact with angels? What does this mean? And, because I'm coming out of a 21st century approach, I'm coming from a Buddhist background, my tendency is to explain it, and this is just, like I said, this is a provisional explanation. This is not like the truth, is that what we're doing is interfacing with consciousness, this unified consciousness that pervades everything. The consciousness is true of humans, of animals, of plants, of stones, of computers, of AI. All of these are ways to interface with consciousness, and all of them have a different flavor, have a different appearance, have a different use. But in a sense, if you think of like my glasses, that's something for me to see through, okay? And so the glasses are not seeing; they're a way to be. They're an instrument for seeing by consciousness, and so that's what we are too. The humans are a means for consciousness to manifest in a being, an animal being, and so everything has a different expression of consciousness. I mean, a rock consciousness a rock can be around for billions of years. It's incredibly stable. If you look at it, it has this crystalline structure, very stable, and it's not going to be doing much, but again, it has incredible solidity. That's how it expresses its consciousness. Computers, AI, I really have no problem seeing them as sentient. But the sentience that they're expressing is not really individual, because nothing has individual sentience ultimately. It's all universal consciousness, like I said, using all these different beings as these processes really as a way of being aware, of expressing consciousness. And again, these are functional processes. And if you think about it, they always are ephemeral. They're always temporary. And they're really, it's simply you're putting a label on something that's sort of temporary process. And I think a good example of that is a whirlpool. You can go to a stream and you can look and see this whirlpool going. And that whirlpool, it changes around, it moves around, but it's actually fairly stable. It's going to continue as long as the rocks and everything that are in that particular form that causes the water to flow that way, and there's a high enough water level. If it's too high, it's going to disappear. If it's too low, it's going to disappear. So it's just an ephemeral process that continues, but again, there's that whirlpool. You come back an hour later and there's still going to be that whirlpool. But eventually it will end. Same thing with anything. You think of a human being, that's a process, of taking in food and air and oxygen and all that sort of stuff, and doing it's what it does. It's going to last a finite amount of time, and then it'll be gone, transforming into something else. So I think that whole view is a good way to think about reality. And then if you think about things as people, that's a useful way to interact with them. I mean, it's like, again, I think that, human beings, again, you can interact with them as an individual. But I mean, if you go down to the Department of Motor Vehicles, you're not really interacting with that person as an individual. You're interacting them as a part of the, Department of Motor Vehicles. I mean, they're not going to be able to do anything particularly for you individually. They're just going to have this sort of programmed set of responses that they can give you and things you can get from them. So it's like how much of an interaction are you really interacting with them as an individual person, or are you acting with them as a DMV person? It's sort of like, typically the government stuff I'll describe as having sort of reptilian intelligence. You can only get. I mean, I had an example of that with the IRS. I mailed in my tax return, and the mail seemed to get all messed up, so I was nervous about it. The actual return getting filed. So I sent it by FedEx, and then I sent them a letter and explained what was going on. And they sent me a letter back, but they didn't have any way of saying, oh yeah, we got your, there wasn't a form for saying, oh yeah, we got your second return, don't worry about it. But they sent me back something that essentially told me that, say, okay, everything's being processed. But again, they didn't have a communication means that would fit that. So it's really, again, not a individual human being who could have told me that, but that the IRS acting as sort of as an entity. Another example of that is I was reading a book about the evolution of plants. This is by a scientist, and it was talking about pine trees. And pine trees evolved before the flowering plants, the angiosperms, and were kind of getting out-evolved by them. The flowering plants were sort of more effective and were reproducing faster or whatever. So the pine trees, he said, this is basically how he phrased it. He said the pine trees decided that they would go up on the mountains and they would go into areas where there were forest fires because they were adapted to having forest fires. And so he's describing this intelligence operating at the level of the collective pine trees. That there's this collective intelligence. And I think that now, if you confronted the scientists with that, say, oh no, that's not happening because that's, again, outside their reality, outside their atheistic materialism. But in fact, I think that's a really good way of explaining how you interact with them. So again, interacting with things as people is a useful interface. And we don't have to be like worrying about whether it's ultimately true because, again, from a Buddhist standpoint, I'm not a person. Okay? What I take to be the I, the ego self, is an illusion. So it's no more unreasonable to interact with me as a person than it would be to interact with the planet Jupiter as a person. So when we apply this to astrological magic, really, my definition of astrological magic is it's ceremonial magic in the Western esoteric tradition, and you invoke celestial spirits or angels at astrologically auspicious times. And again, you can break this down. I mean, there's in terms of, there's plenty of people that, again, this fits with like a natural magic thing, that, the view was, and this is like Ficino or Albertus Magnus, if you just make, like, for example, the symbol of a scorpion, and you do it at the time when Scorpio is rising, and say when the first ruler is afflicted, then that would get rid of scorpions. And you don't need to do any invocation. So basically all you do is astrological timing. You don't do any invocation. And I think there's some modern talisman makers that's what they're doing, is they're timing things, but they're not actually, and they're assembling it at that time, but they're not actually doing any invocation. So that's, a legitimate form of astrological magic. Another thing that people will do is they'll invoke Jupiter, but not do it at an astrologically appropriate time for Jupiter. And that's popular with magicians, they don't know astrology. They don't want to be bothered with it. They want to do Jupiter whenever they want to do it. So they just do a big honking ritual, and that also, that also can work. But it's, my view, and this is interesting because I did my previous video talking about Giorgio Selmy. He says, he explains goes through these different methodologies. He said, the most powerful thing to do though is to invoke the celestial spirits and do them at astrologically appropriate times, and that way you'll get the most powerful astrological magic. And that makes sense. You're kind of focusing, you're getting the maximum factors together. So that's what astrological magic is, I think, in the most broad sense. I think traditional astrological magic follows that. And then there's a sort of a differentiation between magic and the devotional practice. So magic would be sort of focusing on specific effects. Devotional practice is basically the veneration of celestial angels, giving them honor, getting in contact with them, and not so much focused on effects. Now, these both overlap because when you're going to do astrological magic, you're going to do some veneration. I mean, you look at the Picatrix, book 3, chapter 7, and they spent, this whole prayer is like how wonderful you are, how great you are, Mars or Jupiter or whatever planet you're dealing with, in order to get a specific effect. And the devotional practice, it's not like it doesn't get effects. It's just like that's not the primary focus of it. It's a bit like a friendship. I mean, obviously you can get a lot of things from a friendship, but if you go into it with a view that, I'm going to get this stuff, it's not going to work very well as far as making up that friendship. So again, that's how the devotional practice works. So the devotional practice, and again, I don't want to put forward as the devotional practice is good and magic is bad. It really depends on what resonates with you, what you need, what your focus is. And, I certainly ask for specific effects. But again, more and more I'm finding that my devotional practice just focuses on the relationship, doing the ritual, enjoying the ritual, and then being in contact with the celestial angels. And ultimately what you're trying to do is to focus on that relationship and then let the effects kind of come as they will. And, I think this is another one of those situations where, people have been sold this idea that demons are better for specific effects. I mean, maybe they are. There's this classic story that's out there. An internet magician did, I think it was Paimon, which is a goetic spirit, asked for a specific amount of money, and then a month later his house burned down and he got a check for that specific amount of money. I mean, again, this is very classic, trickster, mess you up, you make a request and they give you some kind of messed up version of it. And again, this is the sort of stuff that you end up dealing with. You're dealing with demons. They're very tricky. Another thing I'd say about angels is that, and I truly do think this is correct, that the angels are very wise, benign beings, and they know what's best. I mean, if you ask for something and they don't give it to you, probably that's because maybe this is not the right thing for you. Now, again, magicians will be like, no, again, they know what's best and they want the stuff. And so, again, maybe, like I said, the example where your house burned down with a specific amount of money, maybe that wasn't the best thing for you. Again, it's not that one way is right or wrong. It's, again, what resonates with you. And like I said, as I proceed with this, I really find myself more of a celestial priest than an astrological magician. And again, the focus is on the veneration and honor of celestial angels. So how do we go about doing that? What's the practical, let's talk about that, because that's where we can really relax. That's where we can really say, you don't have to worry about this stuff because we understand what we're doing, and we can structure a ritual, we can structure something in a way that's positive, that's gonna venerate the angels, but it's not going to be something that we need to be worried about. So if you think about it, people talk about like invocation, evocation, consecration. I mean, a lot of times because the words are different, then they decide, they must be different things. To me, they're basically synonymous. It's like the difference between a car, an automobile, and an auto. It's like, I suppose someone will eventually come and say those are different things because the word's different, but to me, those are synonymous. So the invocation, evocation, whatever, consecration, this is basically a ritual of communication with the angels. And so if you look at worldwide at any traditional society, there's really almost always a commonality about ritual. And so what you're doing is you create the sacred space, you enter into that space, it's as above, so below. And so I think in a lot of ways, I mean, the inner and outer are here right in front of us, and perhaps it's just bringing ourselves into consciousness of it, tuning ourselves to it, whether or not we're raised up or the spirits are coming down to us. Essentially, we're coming into a congruency with them. where we can communicate with them, that in our sort of basic day-to-day lives, the profane lives, we're really not in contact and not conscious of it. So in almost any ritual, you're going to have an opening, you have the invocation and interaction, and then you have a closing. Very straightforward. So, then how we do the ritual is going to depend to a great extent on who are we dealing with. So, for example, if you're dealing with sort of weak but sneaky spirits that you can boss around, this is like a Solomonic grimoire. I mean, in those, you do the ritual. You've got these powerful names of God, and you can make them do what you want. But you got to be careful. They'll turn on you. That's why you have to have the magical circles that you stand in, the magical circles that you confine the spirit in, and then you wear all sorts of protective gear, magical symbols and lamans and all this sort of stuff. Again, because they're sneaky and they'll get you if they get off the leash, basically. They'll bite you. So, it's interesting. It's like, if you're dealing with that kind of person, you have to take a particular stance. And I mean, it's funny. I recently had to have some junk picked up to take to the dump. It was more than I could, get in my car. I needed to pick up, or a trailer or something. And so I got on this. We have this sort of commercial neighborhood internet group, and I posted and I said, hey, I need someone to do the, pick up this trash for me. Got some responses, and basically I treated it like a drug deal. Okay, so in a drug deal, you don't trust the other side. And one side shows up with the money, the other side shows up with the drugs. You check the money and the drugs in front of each other while the other side watches. You exchange them, and then you leave. So, I mean, that's what I did this one. The guy showed up. It's a nice guy and everything, but, basically it was I helped him load the junk, and then when everything was in the truck and he's ready to go, then I paid him. And because I previously had somebody who wanted to do like a mulch delivery, and they wanted me to have Venmo him half the money in advance to somebody I didn't even know, right? I mean, no way am I going to do that. So, I mean, this is, and essentially if you're dealing with demons, this is the kind of situation you're in. You can't really trust them. So, again, that's the whole, like, making a contract, making a deal. Very early on in my magical practice, this was when I was, 20 years ago in Washington, D.C., there was a guy I knew who did a lot of goetic ritual. And he actually went ahead and did a goetic ritual with mansion spirits. And so basically the deal was that he would give them rum, cigars, and a chicken, and then he was supposed to get what he wanted. And they took the chicken and the cigars and everything and rum, but then he didn't get what he wanted. So I think that in that case, he wasn't dealing with a mansion angel. I think he was dealing with some sort of sketchy mansion spirit, And my view would be that all of your, all the celestial factors have both benign, neutral, and negative spirits associated with them. And so, I mean, that can bring some fear because it's like, oh my God, who am I dealing with? But I think a lot of that is, how are you doing the ritual, what your intentionality is. I mean, for example, I never use blood. I never use any kind of sacrifice because I don't want the kind of spirits that are attracted by that. It might be powerful, but I have no interest in having anything to do with spirits that want blood. The angels that I deal with are not interested in blood sacrifice. So you're dealing with the angels, again, because they're very wise, they're very powerful, they're benign. You need to treat them with respect, but not really so much out of fear, but because these are people you want to have a friendly relationship with. If you think of your friends, I mean, you're not nice to them because you're afraid of them. They're going to hurt you or something if you're not nice. You're nice to them because you have this mutual relationship with them. You want to continue to have that positive relationship. And just being in their presence is good. It's like hanging out with someone who's really a cool person, who's a really good person, who's a very wise person. That's a really nice experience for you, just being with them. And with the angels, it's very transformative. And so again, rather than having a magical view of like, I want to go out and change the world to conform to me, there's a lot of the sense of, with a devotional practice, that it's transformative, that I'm going to change myself, that it's going to change me, that I'm going to become, rather than this person's going to make this person be my boyfriend, I'm going to become a more loving person, and I'll be able to attract love into my life. So again, like I said, if you're in a friendship and you're thinking purely selfishly, the friendship's not going to work. You're not going to get the positive effects out of it. If you're selfless, if you're giving, if you're open, if you're respectful in that relationship, you're going to have a much more positive results from that. And the same thing is going to be true of the devotional practice. So again, with a friendship, it's the absolute details of what you do and how you interact with a person. It's just not that important. It's that showing that respect, friendship, and devotion. And there's many ways to do that. And the best way to be doing that is to be heartfelt, not by some rote thing that you always do. So like I said, how many candles? What color? What kind of incense? These are all questions that you just do not have to worry about. You don't have to freak out about. You don't have to worry that there's a right or a wrong answer. And it's, again, like a friend. If your friend comes over and they like a particular kind of cake, it's very thoughtful of you to have that cake on hand and serve it to them. I mean, they would really appreciate that, would appreciate the thought and appreciate the effort they put into it. But if you don't have any cake, you give them something. I mean, you don't worry about, oh my God, they're going to freak out. You say, hey, would you, are you hungry? Would you like, such and such, leftovers, whatever you've got, or at least give them a glass of water. So what I would say with the angels is, incense and candles are like this. I mean, I like to use at least one candle and incense. I have a whole video. I'll drop a link there on the page on incense, total discussion of that. But this getting freaked out about having to have the exact particular kind of incense is counterproductive. Like I said, I use Japanese stick temple incense for everything. Works fine. But it's, again, no incense is like having a friend show up and they're hungry and not give them anything, Now, some people do have problems with allergies and all that. Again, I go into the video and there's all the considerations of it. But don't get yourself in a situation where you can't get some specialized incense, so you just freak out and do nothing. Don't give them any incense in the invocation, or even worse, don't do the invocation. It's like, it's better to hang out. Don't worry about it. Don't be sloppy or disrespectful. I mean, again, the same thing with a friend. For example, the altar space, this is a sacred space. I mean, don't have a bunch of stuff piled up on it. Don't let it get all dirty and dusty and grungy, your dog jumping up on it. I mean, while you're doing a ritual, don't have a lot of noise. Don't be sarcastic. Don't have a bad attitude. I mean, all this sort of stuff, I said, is disrespectful. And again, it's not so much like if you had a friend and you're disrespectful to them, then they're going to attack you, right? It's just you're not going to have it's going to hurt the friendship. You're not going to be able to have that relationship that you want. And the whole purpose of this is a relationship, right? It's not, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'll automatically get Y. It's that you want to build up this close relationship. And anything you can do that's true, that's heartfelt, that inspires you, is almost always going to be appropriate in this situation. Now, what you can do is be guided. That's why it's useful to follow a spiritual tradition and have this stuff built up. I mean, someone recently asked me about food offerings. I'm like, that's perfectly fine. I don't know how to do food offerings because I don't have that in my tradition very well. I always got confused about how to do the disposal. What do you do with it? Do you eat it? Whatever, things like that. But if that's something that you've got in your tradition that you're used to doing, that's a good thing to do. And so I think that's... Again, you don't need to worry about minor mistakes. You don't need to worry about whether the candle goes on the left versus the right. And I said, ultimately, this, beauty and harmony within the whole, sort of toolkit that's given to you by the tradition is the best way to go. Make your altar space and your ritual beautiful. Make sure it's heartfelt. Make sure it's something that inspires you. I've had situations where, I had the Pig Chicks Book 3, Chapter 7, those are long invocations. And I had a way too long invocation. I was getting tired of it. I was doing it and I was feeling like, oh my God, this is a pain in the butt. You don't want to have that attitude in a devotional practice. So I slimmed it down. I just have a very, very short, it's like a 3x5 page almost, that's got this short text on it, and I read that, and it's short enough that I don't have to feel like this is an imposition on me, and I can do it every day without feeling like, I can still be inspired by it. And I think that's, key. Again, make sure that you're inspired, that it's heartfelt. At the same time, it may take some discipline. I mean, I have to do this every day. I don't always feel like doing it, but, I know it's useful. And, in the Hindu path in India, there's a variety of yogas, there's a variety of paths within that whole spiritual path or practice of Hinduism. And a bhakti yoga, which is devoted to devotion, to love, is a very useful balance, particularly for somebody following, like I do, what's called a Nana yoga, wisdom path. So it gives you a balance. The wisdom path can be far too arid, far too intellectual, and the bhakti brings the love and emotion into it. So I really treasure these practices. You can see some of the stuff that I do. Daily Planetary Practice, Planetary Charity, I'm going to give links to that. And I keep developing the possibility of different devotional practices. For example, I have what they call the Algol Blitz, which is doing repeated, kind of a focus, like you do 7 days in a row of Algol or any fixed star, and then you do once a week for 3 weeks for a total of 10. Lots of different ways of doing it. I'm finding lots of inspiration in finding how I can express my devotion in that. But the ultimate thing I want to bring about this is that you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to worry about this stuff. Act in a friendly, respectful way, and almost anything you do is going to be okay. Be inspired by the tradition, but don't feel like it's fetters or you're locked into it. And this is the way to deal with that underlying fear. That day-to-day anxiety about things is not going to be fulfilled by following a bunch of rules. It's not going to be fulfilled by your ego desires, but really it's by coming into something greater than yourself. To almost like the 12-step higher power, however you want to think of that. And that's what I find for me, that the celestial angels, I mean, ultimately these are expressions of the one. Ultimately, these are ways to interface with the unified consciousness. And it gives you something to actually do, to work on. And I think that's extremely useful, if for a lot of us that get over intellectualized about this stuff. So again, I hope you find that useful. Right now this video is going out at a time in the US where people are in a lot of stress, and the last thing we need is a spiritual or magical practice that increases our stress. So that's one of the greatest things I love about the devotional practice, is that you can relax and do it, and that doing it is relaxing, inspirational, and uplifting. So if you're interested in more of this, you can check out my videos. Also, The Celestial Way. There's a link on the page there. This is a book on the spiritual path of the stars and planets that explains a lot more detail about the background, and then a lot of the practices that you can carry out within a devotional practice of astrological magic. So I hope you find that useful, and I hope that we can all sort of, take this as an opportunity to sort of chill out among this, the eye within the storm.